Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Chloe Feng. Our top stories tonight. New COVID rules for schools trigger a debate on the eve of the academic year. Mikhail Gorbachev, the former Soviet leader who ended the Cold War, dies. And parkour takes off in Hong Kong. New anti-COVID measures for schools have triggered an ongoing debate. One secondary school principal criticized the Education Bureau for announcing the policy in haste and accused it of adding to the burden on schools and parents with a vaccination award scheme. Joanna Ho reports.
The government announced yesterday that secondary schools will be allowed to conduct full-day in-person lessons only if 90% of their students are triple-jabbed against COVID from November. Ciencia Secondary School Principal Wang Qingyong said his school already has a second jab rate of around 98% and is ready to resume full-day face-to-face classes when the new term begins tomorrow. But if his school cannot meet the new triple jab requirement within the next 2 months, it might have to return to half-day in-person classes. Wang added that a new award scheme in which schools with a high third dose rate will be commended and publicized in a prize-winning list online creates a competitive climate among parents and schools. But his claim was rejected by Subsidized Primary Schools Council Chairwoman Chloe Feng, who argued that awards should not be the main incentive to boost vaccination rates. Instead, it should be the ability to organize extracurricular activities and return to full-day classes. Microbiologist Ha Pak-leung meanwhile urged the Education Bureau to allow primary schools to hold full-day on-campus lessons if they achieve a certain vaccination target. He said there could be a negative impact on the physical and mental health of students if they attend half-day classes for a prolonged period. Joanna Ho, HKIBC.
Daily COVID infections in the city have again exceeded 9,000. More than 250 people, most of them elderly, were admitted to hospital.
Many of the elderly have other medical diseases. For example, hypertension. Some of them even have cancers. So we are screening the cases according to our clinical judgment. That means we will admit the case who are clinically need to be stayed in hospital. For example, who need the intravenous fluid, intravenous drug, or sometimes you need the oxygen.
All but 228 of the 9,495 new cases were locally acquired. 9 more COVID-related deaths were reported today. One was a 34-year-old man who also had polycythemia, which is an abnormal increase in the number of red blood cells. Health officials warn that the caseload will continue to go up as students return to school tomorrow. Chief Executive John Lee has scrapped a visit to Guangdong and will hold a virtual meeting with officials instead. This comes as Shenzhen detected a mutated Omicron subvariant. Janice Low reports.
Chief Executive John Lee has scrapped his first official visit to Guangdong province because of COVID fears. Instead, he will hold virtual meetings with Guangdong, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen officials tomorrow to discuss cooperation and reopening the border. Lee said a virtual meeting is the most efficient way as COVID concerns rise. Shenzhen has identified a new Omicron subvariant, BF.15, which is said to be a mutation of the most infectious BA.5 subvariant. Of the 1,675 new cases on the mainland yesterday, 37 were detected in Shenzhen. 4 districts have been shut down. They are Luohu, Longgang, Longhua, and Futian. The location of Huaqiang Bay, the world's largest electronics wholesale market. Buses on more than 330 routes have been taken out of service, and 24 train stations shut down since Monday. The provincial capital, Guangdong, recorded 7 more COVID cases, with most of them in Haizhu district. Kindergartens, primary and secondary schools in the district have suspended face-to-face classes. Some restaurants are allowed to provide only takeaway services, while buses and trains are not operating in some areas. Although the source of transmission remains unknown, health officials said the outbreak is caused by the BA.2.76 subvariant. Janice Low, HKIBC.
4 men have escaped with watches worth $10 million in a daylight robbery in Causeway Bay. The robbers dashed into the shop on Lockhart Road at around 1 p.m. and threatened staff before escaping with their haul. CCTV footage showed 2 robbers pointing a knife and a gun-like object at staff. The other 2 robbers grabbed around 80 to 100 watches from a cabinet and stuffed them into a bag. All 4 fled in a car that headed towards Jeffy Road. The entire robbery took less than 3 minutes. Police later said the gun also had a hammer and ordered staff to hand over the cabinet key. Hong Kong has been invited to play a more important role in the Belt and Road Initiative. In a virtual address, Vice Premier Han Zheng pledged to support the SAR in consolidating its position as an integrated services center. Isaac Lee reports.
Chief Executive John Lee led a list of dignitaries at the Belt and Road Summit in the Convention and Exhibition Center in Wan Chai. The 2-day event kicks off with a virtual address by Vice Premier Han Zheng.
香港是共建“一带一路”的积极参与者、贡献者，也是受益者。
Han noted that Hong Kong is already an active participant, contributor, and beneficiary of the Belt and Road Initiative. But he expects the SAR to play a more important role by acting as an integrated services platform. Han pledged Beijing's support for Hong Kong to develop sectors such as aviation, finance, and legal consultation, in which the SAR has an edge. He also assured that the common law system will be preserved.
发挥对外文化交流窗口作用，促进文化相融。
The Vice Premier added that Hong Kong should continue to serve as a window for cultural exchanges between East and West, by attracting more overseas students and scholars. Speaking at the same summit, Financial Secretary Paul Chan said some participants in the Belt and Road Initiative are using the yuan for trade. As the world's largest offshore center for the Chinese currency, Chan said Hong Kong will provide more investment options for these countries. Isaac Lee, HKIBC.
Overseas, former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev has died at the age of 91. He will be remembered for reforms that led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. Winner Wang reports.
Mikhail Gorbachev was loved in the West, but largely reviled at home. He was the man who ended the Cold War, won a Nobel Peace Prize, and changed the face of Soviet politics. But at home, Gorbachev, who came to power in 1985, was blamed by many for the demise of the Soviet Union. His attempt to open up the superpower and make the government more accountable led to the end of communist rule. For that, party hardliners tried to overthrow him in 1991. The coup was unsuccessful, but Gorbachev's hold on power was approaching its end. One by one, the members of the Soviet bloc declared independence, ultimately becoming 15 new countries, with Russia remaining the most powerful. Gorbachev retired, started a liberal newspaper, and did commercials for Pizza Hut. Over 2 decades later, he would see Western businesses retreat from Russia as President Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Gorbachev also broke the mold of cold Russian leaders. He shed tears at the funeral of his wife Raisa, who died in 1999 from leukemia. Following news of Gorbachev's death after a long and serious illness, world leaders paid their tributes. Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian sent China's condolences, praising Gorbachev for making positive contributions to Sino-Russian relations. Wenna Wang, HKIBC.
Hong Kong's retail sales rebounded last month, increasing by 4.1% from a year earlier. Better labor conditions helped sales recover after falling in the previous 2 months. An improving labor market led to a revival in retail sales after a 2-month decline. Government figures show that retail sales in July rose 4.1% year-on-year to $28.3 billion. A sharp contrast with June, when sales dropped 1.3%. Online sales were favored during the pandemic, accounting for $2.2 billion, or nearly 8% of last month's total value. Among categories, sales of jewelry, watches, clocks, and other valuable gifts increased by the most at over 28%. While supermarkets reported sales rising 1.7%. But department stores saw sales falling by nearly 10%. Purchases of motor vehicles and parts saw the biggest decline of nearly 12%. Looking ahead, officials expect the second batch of consumption vouchers to drive up the spending momentum, but warn that tighter financial conditions and the worsening epidemic could weigh on the sector's recovery in coming months. Now let's take a look at the markets. The Hang Seng Index closed up 5 points. Top 10 active stocks: Meituan up $4.80, Tencent up $3.60, JD.com down 20 cents, AIA down 50 cents, Baidu down $4.80. Forex trading against Hong Kong dollars, a euro is at 7.84, British pound at 9.12. Australian dollar at 5.37. Moving on to the UK market, the London FTSE is currently down 85 points. A little-known sport is gaining ground in Hong Kong thanks to the internet. But parkour is definitely not for the faint-hearted. Chloe Feng has the story.
Running, climbing, jumping, and flipping. That's parkour, an action sport in which players move at speed over obstacles to get from one point to another without equipment to help them.
I would say this is my really favorite sport. I can't think of doing another stuff.
Singh says parkour keeps him going, but he avoids dangerous places and calculates the risks first.
I am afraid of losing my life because doing a parkour, but I know I wouldn't because let's say I just don't like do rooftop jumps as much I used to do before in the beginning.
Parkour's image was dented 2 weeks ago when a 70-year-old youth died while trying to jump from one rooftop to another in Tsim Sha Tsui. Samson Lau, a founder of the parkour association Gravity Dimension, was disgusted by comments that the victim deserved it. Some people describe parkour as dangerous, but Lau said they misunderstand the sport.
What they know about parkour is through the internet, and those clips are often like eye-catching, scary, like big jumps on the roof. That's what people like to do or intended to look. So that's why people got the perception to think that, oh, this is what parkour is like. But there are a lot more elements that they cannot see or are uninterested to see.
Lau said practitioners must be mentally prepared and very patient.
For parkour lovers, their playground could be anywhere, as long as there are obstacles for them to navigate. This semi-abandoned maze inside a Kwun Tong housing estate, for example, has all the right features to hone their skills. Chloe Feng, HKIBC.
On to the weather now. Hot with sunny intervals tomorrow, along with showers and thunderstorms. Temperatures will range between 27 and 32 degrees. It will get hotter towards the weekend. Now let's take a look at the weather around the world. That's our main news for Wednesday night. Join us for more news at 11. I'm Chloe Feng. Good evening.